Hans Axel von Fersen was a Swedish count and marshal of the realm of Sweden, and even participated in the American Revolutionary War and shook George Washington's hand. But he's mostly famous for being an intimate friend of Marie Antoinette, the French queen at the time. They were so close that many historians believe that von Fersen was the real father of her second son, Louis Charles, who would have been King Louis XVII if it hadn't been for the outbreak of the French Revolution. Here you have it all: war, politics, revolutions, love, and endless intrigue. But then, in one brutal moment, it all ends. A mob descends upon him, and the guards do nothing. The great Count von Fersen was beaten to death in the streets of Stockholm, under the very eyes of the monarchy he served. This is no ordinary tale. This is Axel von Fersen, the lover, the hero, and the true love of Marie Antoinette. This is History with Magnus. But before we begin, do the subscribe thing so you don't miss my next video about history. Axel von Fersen was born in 1755, the son of Field Marshal Axel von Fersen the Elder, the de facto parliamentary leader of the Hats Party, and the most politically influential man in Sweden at that time, and also one of the richest in the Swedish realm. The dashingly handsome young Axel was unlike his father, a womanizer, and is said to have been intimate with more than 100 women. The young Axel was influenced by French culture, owing in part to his father's services to Louis XV of France. And it was here he met Princess Marie Antoinette for the first time when they were both only 19 years old. Marie Antoinette caught sight of the young Count Fersen at a masquerade party, and the two teenagers was instantly taken by the other, even though the meeting was brief. And the meeting made an impression on the young Count.
His diary records,
"The Dauphin talked to me for a long time without me knowing who she was. At last, when she was recognized, everybody pressed round her, and at 3 o'clock she retired into a box. I left the ball."
They met again a week later in Paris at another social gathering. In that time, Marie Antoinette stayed so long and talked to von Fersen that people started to wonder who he really was, and the two kept meeting again and again. Then von Fersen had to leave Paris to go to England to learn English. During these months von Fersen was in England, the old king, Louis XV, passed away, and his grandson became King Louis XVI, and thus Marie Antoinette became Queen of France. Von Fersen returned and met the new queen again, and they met so frequently that rumors and gossip started to spread, even reaching King Gustav III in Stockholm. In a letter from Ambassador Kreutz to King Gustav, he writes, "I wish to confide in your majesty that Count Fersen has been so well received by the queen that it has, understandably, led to some gossip. I admit that even I cannot help but think she has some feelings for him. I've seen too many clear signs to doubt it." But the American War of Independence had broken out, and it represented a unique opportunity for von Fersen, but also a way to silence the rumors about them that was prevalent at Versailles. France had sent an army to America to fight the British, and von Fersen volunteered. He became an officer, and since he spoke English, he served as interpreter for the French general. He participated in several battles and distinguished himself, and was present at every negotiation between George Washington and the French. He participated in the decisive Battle of Yorktown, where he was awarded one of America's highest honors, the Order of the Cincinnati. When the war ended, von Fersen returned to France and to Versailles, where Marie Antoinette was playing the harp in her salon when she saw Fersen. She stopped playing, and the entire room fell silent. All eyes turned to the young count. They soon resumed their relationship, and it became close and intense. In the letters he wrote to his sister in Stockholm, he writes, "I've made my decision. I will never marry, because I belong to the only woman who has ever truly loved me." This went on for weeks and months, showing how much in love the two lovebirds were. He even sent his sister a lock of Marie Antoinette's hair, writing, "It is she who gave it to me. So good, so perfect, and I feel I love her even more since she gave it willingly." To remain close to the queen in Versailles, Count Fersen took an unusual step. He purchased command of a military regiment in France. And at 28 years, von Fersen became a colonel and led one of only 12 foreign units allowed in the French army. Fersen was now paid 20,000 livres per year directly by the French king, roughly 100 times the annual salary of a French weaver. He was now closer into Marie Antoinette's inner circle and began hanging out in the queen's private retreat, the Petit Trianon, where they were shielded from the strict routines at Versailles. Like the morning routine, where the royals were dressed by eager courtiers every morning.
This is ridiculous.
This, madame, is Versailles.
Check out my video for more on that. Here, they acted like privileged royals do, drinking from painted porcelain, shaped like the queen's breasts, laughing beneath the soft vines of their own secluded Eden. There was even constructed a love grotto, a hidden cave where the queen and von Fersen could escape and be lovers in peace. In 1784, there was a party at the queen's private estate, the Petit Trianon, where Sweden's King Gustav III was present. Axel was the queen's main focus, and they celebrated and drank. And exactly 9 months later to the day, the queen gave birth to a boy who, according to many historians, bears a strong resemblance to Axel von Fersen. He had red hair, something neither the king nor the Queen of France had in their lineage, and in a portrait of him at age 8 or 9, many believe that he looks far more like von Fersen than his supposed real father, King Louis XVI. The boy was also given the unusual title Duke of Normandy, which was the Viking province in France, a title no one had held since the 13th century. Louis XVI, who wrote in his diary every day, wrote, "The Queen today gave birth to the Duke of Normandy. Everything went exactly as when my son was born." The emphasis on my son was a strange thing for a king to do when the child was supposedly his. Did he know and realize that the scandal this would bring would be devastating to him and undermine him as king? The boy was named Louis Charles, and when his older brother died, Louis Charles became the crown prince of France and would have been Louis XVII if the monarchy hadn't fallen. It wouldn't be the last time royals were unfaithful. Whether von Fersen was the real father or not, history was approaching fast and relentless for the secret lovers. Sweden and Russia, and later Denmark, ended up in a war, and Fersen fought on the Swedish side. At the same time, events were unfolding in France, with radical political winds were sweeping across the country, threatening the royal houses of Europe. King Gustav of Sweden decided to send Count von Fersen to Versailles as his personal envoy, to report directly from France. He was again at Queen Marie Antoinette's side, and was there on the very day the French Revolution broke out. Tens of thousands of Parisians had marched out to Versailles to lay siege to the palace and force the royal couple back to Paris. And Fersen was part of the carriages that escorted the royal family. He bought a house in Paris close enough to the palace where the royal couple was held and was able to visit the queen every day, where they were planning the royal family's escape. The plan was to smuggle the entire royal family out of Paris and get them as close to the German border as possible. Fersen had obtained a key to a secret entrance leading directly into one of the royal apartments. Fersen was to order a large and discreet traveling coach. But there was one critical problem. They needed passports because in revolutionary France, even private citizens needed a passport for every single town they passed through. A fake Russian baroness named von Korff was used, together with the Russian ambassador, arranged for a set of fake passports made out for the royal family. Von Fersen traveled in advance to the town of Aachen, near the border where they would escape in 3 different carriages, a few hours apart. In total, 13 people would take part in the escape, and Fersen arranged everything, including the horses. On June 20th, the escape was set to happen, and on the morning of the escape, Marie Antoinette was reportedly trembling with nervousness, and the king had written something in Fersen's diary. "What is happening today? I shall never forget what you have done for me." Fersen had dressed up as a coachman, with a cloak, 2 pistols tucked into his belt, and drove off. Marie Antoinette woke her children and dressed them in simple clothing that Fersen had smuggled in earlier, along with a key to a door, where she met Fersen. They arrived at the small village of Bondy, where fresh horses were waiting, and from here, they would follow the main eastern way, toward Varennes and to freedom. Fersen wanted to stay with them until the end, but the king insisted he leave. The king refused to be driven to freedom by a foreign nobleman, especially one who had also been his wife's rumored lover. So Fersen reluctantly said goodbye and galloped off toward Belgium into the night. But the royal carriages were caught only 70 kilometers from the border in safety when someone recognized the royal couple. When hearing of this, Fersen broke down in devastation, but only a few days later, he received a letter from Marie Antoinette, sent in cipher. It said, "I have at last the opportunity to tell you that I love you, and that I am yours entirely. Write to me, my dear and faithful friend. I cannot live unless I can at least write to you." Now Fersen and Marie Antoinette engaged in an intense and secretive correspondence. Their letters were smuggled out of Paris. Fersen was now officially appointed Sweden's ambassador to Brussels. But his real mission was to undermine the French Revolution and rescue the royal family. In practice, he became the French king's unofficial foreign minister because he was the only reliable link between the Bourbon family and the rest of Europe. Gustav, the King of Sweden, was ready to go to great lengths to help the French royal couple. He proposed sending as many as 30,000 Swedish troops to support a restoration. The idea was to have Fersen lead a cavalry assault into the capital and liberate the royal family by force. But it didn't happen, and in March 1792, Fersen made the dangerous decision to return to Paris in secret and began forging documents for the royal family. Fersen managed to sneak into the Tuileries Palace and up into Marie Antoinette's apartment. In his diary afterward, he writes only this: "She was well." Then he adds two more words: "stayed there." That was Fersen's discreet code for having spent the night with a woman. The next morning, Fersen met with King Louis and he laid out his new escape plan, which had been approved and supported by King Gustav of Sweden. But it quickly became clear that the king no longer dared or wanted to escape, saying, "They think me weak and indecisive, but none of them can imagine what I endure." For von Fersen, this moment would mark the last time he would ever see the king and the last time he would lay eyes on Marie Antoinette. But Fersen wasn't done yet, because once again, he would affect the fate of the French royal couple, this time in an even more disastrous way. In late July 1792, the city of Paris awoke one morning to a manifesto posted on doors and walls throughout the capital. It was a warning from the counter-revolution, signed in the name of Duke of Brunswick, commander of the Austrian-Prussian armies then threatening France. It said, "Woe to those who lay a hand on the royal family. Anyone who resists the Allied armies will be punished by death, and their homes and cities will be destroyed." The text was actually written by von Fersen himself, and it was intended as a deterrent, meant to protect the king and queen from revolutionary violence. But the effect was the exact opposite. The revolutionaries saw it as confirmation of treason, and enraged crowds stormed the Tuileries Palace. Hundreds died in the fighting, and the royal family barely escaped with their lives and were now imprisoned in a medieval fortress in Paris. A summary tribunal was held, and Louis XVI was found guilty of treason and executed. Von Fersen made one last desperate attempt to free his love. He considered organizing a commando cavalry raid on the conciergerie, but it was logistically impossible. His final hope was to bribe someone influential revolutionary, and bribes were discussed, but it was too late. This bribe attempt accelerated the trial, and Marie Antoinette was convicted and sentenced to death. On October 16, 1793, she was executed, and 4 days later, Axel von Fersen received the news in Brussels. He wrote to his sister, "I have lost everything I had in the world. I have loved her deeply and would sacrifice everything for her. Why did I not die by her side?" With the Queen's death, Axel von Fersen's significance in international politics vanished. His unique contacts with the royal couple and his visibility were now gone. Von Fersen returned to Sweden, but continued to work for the counter-revolution, and he became one of the new Swedish king's closest advisors. During this period, wars raged in Europe, and the French Republic had defeated the German states, and a peace conference was to be held in Rastatt. Fersen was sent as Sweden's envoy, but it ended in disaster for the Swedes. The French delegation was led by the young General Napoleon Bonaparte. When Count von Fersen and Napoleon met, Napoleon refused to formally recognize him. He refused to call Fersen Count or Ambassador and addressed him only as Monsieur. Napoleon did not want to have anything to do with von Fersen, who had been close to the Queen and was widely believed to be her lover. However, Fersen didn't take this too hard. He was rather satisfied to be recognized in Europe as the Queen's lover. But Fersen's fate would soon turn the worse, because suddenly the Swedish crown prince had a stroke and died. Immediately, rumors spread that it was Fersen who were behind the supposed poisoning, and also the king seemed to suspect that Fersen was involved. The newspapers began writing about it, accusing Fersen and his sister of poisoning the crown prince. The coffin of the deceased heir was to be brought into Stockholm, and Fersen, being the marshal of the realm, was responsible for the procession. There had been rumors for some time that there would be trouble, and Fersen himself had been warned as late as the same morning, but he did not care. Thousands of people gathered along the entire route, but soon the carriage carrying Fersen was pelted with rotten vegetables and stones thrown down onto it. He was hit by a stone, but managed to pull himself up and keep control, while shouts grew louder and louder. "Murderer! Murderer! Death to Fersen!" They pulled Fersen out of the carriage, but he saw an officer he knew and shouted, "Help me!" But the general did not intervene either. He just rode away. Fersen was beaten and torn apart, and some people even jumped on his chest long after he was dead. All his clothes were gone except for the suspenders on his trousers. During this whole macabre scene, the soldiers present stood and just watched and did nothing. The king had ordered that no military firing of live rounds was to happen at the funeral, even though he had been warned twice that there would be riots and trouble. A later investigation showed that the Crown Prince Carl Gustav had not been poisoned at all. When it was finally established that von Fersen was innocent of the murder, he was posthumously cleared 6 months after his public lynching. Axel von Fersen's sister, Sophie Piper, retreated after the lynching to her family estate here at Lofstad outside Norrköping. She lived only to tend the memory of her murdered brother and raised a monument and wrote this inscription on it. "And the devoted brother, who died in his last hour on June 20th, 1810, she witnessed there and held a memorial." So, in the end, France traded a charming Swedish bastard love child for a hat-loving emperor with world domination issues.
Vive la Révolution.
I guess. Thank you for holding on all the way to the end. Remember to subscribe and put on all notifications so you don't miss my next video about history.